Homemade pot holders can be such an easy and cute addition to your kitchen. So today I'm going to show you how to do the crocheted thermal stitch that will make a nice thick pot holder that is safe to use when taking things in and out of your oven. You won't have that heat transfer through it because it is so nice and thick. You can make pot holders, baskets, headbands. You can even make a mat for your pet. This is the perfect stitch for that. So let's dig right in. This is solo stitching. I'm Lavina Perry. Let's stitch. So I have a size 4 medium weight yarn and I am using a size H 5mm crochet hook for this project. You can use a heavier yarn for this if you're looking to make this even thicker and make the stitching closer together. But I think for a pot holder, I mean, you can see like when I bend this, it still kind of holds its shape. It's very thick and very sturdy for a pot holder. So you just have to decide, depending on what project that you're using it for, if you need to go with a bulkier yarn. So for the pot holder, I did 25 chain stitches, and I'm just going to be doing a sample today, but in case you do want to make a pot holder out of this stitch, I started with a chain of 25 stitches. If you just want to practice and you want to stitch along with me, I am going to do 11 chain stitches for this sample. One thing to note as well is that if you do plan on using this as a pot holder that you're going to be using with very hot things coming out of the oven, 100% cotton will be better, because if you have a synthetic yarn, it is more likely to melt when you're holding on to something really hot. The fibers that are touching it can actually melt and they can turn black and kind of char, which is not that attractive. So up to you, but my recommendation would be, if you're going to be making a pot holder, use 100% cotton yarn. Okay, so now I have my row of chains. I did 11. So the first step is we are going to single crochet in each stitch down the row, starting in the second stitch from the hook. So this should leave you with a total of 10 single crochets. At the end, if you're working the sample, if you are making the pot holder, you will have 24 single crochets. And our last single crochet. Right. And then we're going to chain 1, and I'm going to turn this vertical. So typically when you're doing a crochet project, when you turn, you're flipping it over to face the back. For the thermal stitch, when we turn it, we want to turn it vertical with the same side facing us. All right, so the side that you just worked should still be facing up, and then we're just going to turn it long ways so it has kind of a tail hanging down. The most confusing part of the thermal stitch is getting yourself set up on these first couple of rows. So we're going to go over it, and then I'll just walk you through it. If it's not clear, go ahead and drop down in the comments and let me know. But basically, what we're going to be doing is, for each row, we're going to be working the back loop. So if this was the row that we're working on, we have our front loop and our back loop of each stitch across. So we're going to be working into the back loop only, and then we're going to be working into the back loop of the row below. So what that will look like then is, because we're going to turn it this way to make it easier to get to both of those back loops. So we're going to just insert the hook through this back loop and then through the back loop on the row below. And with these chain stitches, because that was your first row, you just want to work into this one side of the stitch. This stitch right here is a little bit tight, so I'm just going to work my hook in there. There we go. And then you can see I have the 2 loops on there. I'm going to yarn over and pull up a loop. And then I'm going to finish the single crochet. Now you can work this stitch in a half double crochet. For this project, I decided to do the single crochet so that everything is nice and tight together, since I am going to be using this as a pot holder and I don't want to have very many holes, because I don't want to have that heat transfer when I'm picking up a hot pan. We can see that we worked the first 2 loops here, this back loop and this loop of the chain stitch. So now we're going to move to the next stitch, and then we're going to move to the next stitch of the chain stitches, and we're just going to repeat that. Pull up a loop and complete the single crochet. And we're going to do that going down the line. And the trickiest part of all of this is just making sure that you're moving to the next stitch and not grabbing the same stitch that you did, or getting your stitches off and uneven, or grabbing the wrong loop. So just make sure that you're keeping your work straight up and down and grabbing the back loop of the next stitch and the back loop of the row below. Pull up a loop, complete the single crochet, and then move to the next stitch. Insert there, pull up a loop, complete the single crochet. And you will want to keep your stitches not loose, but make sure that they're not too tight, or it does make it challenging to be able to get into the loops, especially when you're working on the loop below or the row below. So if it's too tight, you do want to pull it out and redo that first row to make sure that you have room to get your hook in between the stitches. Alright, coming up to the end here, just in working through each stitch, back loop of the next stitch and the back loop of the row below, and completing a single crochet. Alright, so we're to the last stitch. You can see our last V there, and I'm going to insert my hook through there and through the stitch on the row below. Okay. And pull up my loop and complete my last single crochet, and I'm going to chain 1. So this is what it looks like, or what it should look like. And we've just created like this little shelf right here. Okay. So now when we turn, so we're not turning this way, because that's how we would normally turn, right? We're going to flip it over and go back the other way. We're just going to turn it this way. So we were working like this. So you're basically just going to turn it 45 degrees this way, not flipping it over. And then we're going to start working the same way that we did on the last one. So now that we have one row done, we're working our second row, and we're going to be working in the back stitch. So if you can see the top, there's your V, your front stitch, and your back stitch. And then the row below, you can see the back stitch is sticking out. And that's what made our shelf. The little shelf that we created by only working in the back row or the back loop of the last row, we have all of these stitches that are exposed, this one side of the stitch, and that's what we're going to be working into. So we're going to start in the second stitch. So we have our chain stitch here, and then we're going to be working into that next stitch, into the back loop, and then in through this loop here. And we're going to pull up a stitch through both loops. Looks like my stitch got divided there. Pull that out. Oh. And work through both of those, or pull through both of those, and then yarn over and complete a single crochet. And then we're going to make sure that you move to the next stitch. So if you kind of squeeze this together like that, you can see you're going to be working into the loops that line up with each other. So moving to our next stitch through the back loop, and then through the loop from the row down, and then pull up a loop and complete the single crochet. And then move to the next stitch through this like that, and complete the single crochet. And I'm going to keep doing that all the way down the row. Okay, we're to the last stitch, and this is where there can be a lot of confusion, because you can see when you're just looking at it like this, it's really hard to see this second loop because it's kind of hidden underneath this here. This is not the stitch that you want to work into. But if you pull this out so that you can see your last stitch, so there's one side and there's the second side. That is the loop that you want to insert your hook into. And then, let me pull that out and do it again. That just slid right in there. So we want to insert it into the back loop of that last stitch and the back loop from the next row down. And then we're going to go ahead and complete our last single crochet. So you want to count. It's very important that you check as you're going along to make sure that you've got all your stitches for the thermal stitch, because it's very easy to miss your first or your last, or get confused or add a stitch if you're not getting your stitches lined up correctly. So by just doing a little count at the end of each row, you'll prevent yourself from having any major problems where you have to tear out several rows. All right, so we have 10 stitches, which is exactly where we want to be. And then we're going to chain one. And again, when we turn, We're at the end of our row here. We're just going to turn this 45 degrees, and that's how we're going to work into the next row. So now we're at row 3, and you can see that there's a pattern that's starting to form here, where we actually have the back loop of the row we just worked and the back loop of the previous row are very close together, and they line up very nicely, so they're very easy to see when we're stitching into them. So you're gonna, don't work into your chain, obviously. You're gonna go to that first stitch and the first stitch of the row below, and you're just gonna keep working those single crochets using those 2 loops from each stitch. Alright, so we're to our last stitch, and again you can see that our loop that we need to work into is hidden behind this loop, and it's difficult to see. So, but if you turn this and you pull it out, you can see the loop from our stitch. So there's the V. This is the loop right here that we want to work into. And I'm just gonna work my hook underneath that one right there, and then into the loop from the row below, and complete my single crochet, and then chain 1. So now that we have a few rows, we can see what it is that we are creating. So if you look at the bottom, it has a nice rounded edge on the bottom. And if you look at the top of your work, you can see that what we're doing is we're actually crocheting 2 sides of the project. So we're going up one side and then up the other side. So each pass is forming half of a row. So this is one half of the row, and then when we work here, that'll be the other half of the row. So every row will be 2 layers thick, which makes a really nice insulated piece of fabric that we're working on. So it's very cool. This is a very interesting stitch. There's a lot of things that you could use it for, especially if you live in a super cold place. I feel like this thermal stitch, even if you did it in a half double crochet instead of a single crochet, would make a really great hat. They would make really great mittens because they're so thick. You're not going to get a lot of temperature transfer through this crocheted fabric, which it makes it really useful. So let's just double check, make sure we have our 10 stitches. There's 10, and now we're going to turn it again 45 degrees and then start working into that first stitch. And I'm just going to do a few rows here now that we've got the idea down and what it is that we're doing. I'm just going to crochet a few rows, and then we will come back and look at what we've made, and I'll show you how to finish this off, because there is a special way to finish it since the rows are uneven, in order to get a nice closure and a nice finished look at the edge of your project. Okay, so I went ahead and did some rows to give myself about 20 rows of stitches here. So if you remember that each row is basically half of a row. So this would look more like about 10 rows. And now we're going to finish off the end. So if you're doing the pot holder and you've been working 24 stitches on each row back and forth, you're up to the corner now, and the pot holder measures 6.5 by 6.5. So if you are doing 24 rows across, and I did 44 rows up, depending on your gauge, that may be a little different. So if you're measuring it, just know that however wide it is, that's how tall it should be as well. So that's how many rows you'll need to do. But just for reference, I did 25 chains, which resulted in 24 stitches, and then it took me 44 rows to get to the top, to get to 6.5 inches. So at this point, if you're working your pot holder, you are going to put the little loop on here. So if you want something to hang it, this is optional. You don't have to do this. I just did a little row of chains. That's all that this is. So I chained 20 for the little loop, and I'll show you how to do that on our little sample. So if you are working on it, then you will know what to do. So I went ahead and I chained 10 stitches here for the little handle. So here's our row that we just finished, and I did a row of chains off of that. So what I'm going to do is, instead of just going through one loop, I'm going to go through both loops of that stitch, and then I'm also going to go through the back loop from the row before. Pull this, make sure that's good. And then I'm going to pull up a loop through both loops. You can see that there. Through all 3 loops. So I put it through 1, 2, 3. So we had those 3 that we had to pull back through. And now, instead of doing a single crochet, I'm just going to slip stitch. Okay? And I'm going to keep working that same pattern all the way down to close off this gap and create a finished edge that is as similar as possible to our beginning edge. So get my yarn tighter here. Okay, so this is our next stitch. So instead of working through that back loop like we've been doing, I'm going to go through both loops, and then I'm going to go through the loop from the row below. So I should have 1, 2, 3, 4 loops over my hook. I'm going to yarn over, and I'm going to pull through 3, and then pull through the 4th one. And if it gets a little tricky, feel free to like turn your work like I have to. And I just slip stitch to finish that off. Okay, so let's do it again. So through both loops of the next stitch and through the back loop of the next row down, yarn over, pull through 3 and 4. And that's what it's going to look like on the side. I'll pull that up there a little so you can see it better, so you can make sure that yours is looking the same. And we're just going to keep working that through each stitch all the way to the end. Coming up on the end here, again we're going through both loops of the stitch, the next stitch, and the back loop of the row below, and we're slip stitching through all the loops. And now we're to the last stitch, so I want to make sure that I get both legs of my stitch and then the back loop of the row below, and then slip stitch that. There we go. And that is what the finished top row will look like. And you can see that you have, if you're doing the potholder, it makes a very nicely attached stitch. I like doing this better than coming back and making it afterwards, just because it's built in. It's not gonna come undone. It's not gonna tear off. Like, it's part of the potholder that you're making. So that is what the thermal stitch, the single crochet thermal stitch, will look like. If you are planning to use the half double crochet thermal stitch, I would highly recommend that you master the single crochet thermal stitch before doing the half double crochet, because you need to know where your hook is supposed to go and sort of the mechanics of creating this double-sided, almost like a 2-layer stitch before you add in extra loops. That will help you to not get confused on where to put your hook and end up dropping stitches and missing out and having to pull everything out and go back. So once you have this mastered, it's fairly simple to do once you have it all figured out. So don't let the complexity of those first couple of rows and getting it set up deter you from working this stitch, because it is a nice skill to have, to be able to create a thicker fabric than just a single layer crochet fabric for doing all kinds of different projects. Drop down in the comments and let me know if you have any questions on creating the single crochet thermal stitch, and I'll do my best to answer them there. And I will also put a link to the ultimate guide to crochet for your mental health, because crochet is not just fun, it's good for you. And that's all I have. So until next time, happy stitching.